Our project is titled How Input Subsidy Policies Change the Cowpea Farming Landscape in West Africa. Our goal is to better understand the consequences of fertilizer subsidies for cowpea farming communities in West Africa. We have a focus on crop diversity, gender effects, and diet quality. At Michigan State, I'm Melinda Smale. I work with Véronique Thériault and a student, Sibir Ahmed. In Mali, Bourema Kone of the Institut d'Économie Rurale leads the research and supervises 2 students. Amidou Assima has been leading quite a bit of this work. In Burkina Faso, Virginie Maiga, who is a professor at the Université de Norvège-Zongo, leads this work and supervises a PhD student and 3 MSc students. Last year, I mentioned some results from a paper led by Véronique that was later published in Food Policy. In this paper, we found that the fertilizer subsidy results in a greater concentration of area in crops and target crops and reduced evenness of the area distribution among crops grown by farming households. This is a costly program that clearly favors a non-food crop, which is cotton, and starchy staples, in this case, that would be rice, maize, and to a lesser extent, sorghum and millet, over other nutrient-dense crops such as cowpea or high-value crops. And so this has obvious implications for food and nutrition security. In the second publication last year, we focused a little bit more on farm women. I led this paper. We found that women manage cowpea plots as a primary or a secondary crop, but less frequently than men, although they also work on fields managed by men where cowpea is grown as a second crop. And these fields would be those large fields planted to cereals that are often called the Grand Champs and are collectively worked and supervised by the senior elder male in the household. This is sort of the model in the dryland system. We found that subsidized fertilizer received by the farming household, again, reduces areas and area shares planted with cowpea as an intercrop, and is also negatively associated with women's cowpea harvests and revenues, with the opposite effect on men's revenues. And findings raise questions regarding the design of the subsidy and also gender differentiated effects. The third paper, which was led by Amidou Assima, was published at the end of 2021 in the International Journal of Sustainable Agriculture. Amidou found that total subsidized fertilizer received at the village scale is also negatively associated with the richness of crops grown and incentivizes land allocation from targeted crops away from other crops, such as cowpea. Again, this has agronomic, nutritional, and revenue implications for farming families in these communities. Since he estimated a simultaneous model, he also found that the richer the crop species in a village, the more probable that cowpea is still grown. A paper that Amidou and I worked on together is in review, and in that paper, we ask whether it is the diversity of crops on farms or local market purchases that most contribute to the diet of rural households in Mali. And contrary to what we had seen in the literature, we actually found a very strong effect of crop diversity on farms. And this sort of substantiates that many of these households are still dependent upon what they produce for their food. But we also found a significant effect of purchases in local markets. And so we recommend policy interventions at a regional scale that would enhance the diversity of crops on farms, but also stimulate the trade of diverse food products in local markets. CBER tested the effects of input subsidies on crop diversity with the data set from Burkina Faso, and also found that households receiving the fertilizer subsidy allocate more land to targeted crops than non-targeted crops, less land to cowpea as either a main crop or intercrop, and grow a less rich, less even portfolio of crop species. So these results are robust across data sets and across models, econometric models that we apply. However, he found that the cowpea seed subsidy offsets this bias of the fertilizer subsidy towards targeted crops. Veronique is currently leading an in-depth analysis of the role of women in promoting neglected crops, the case of cowpea in Burkina Faso. And first, in terms of land management and cowpea cultivation, she's found that 75% of households cultivate both collectively and individually managed plots. So this is similar to the structure in the dryland farming areas of Mali, in that a senior male elder in the household supervises collective production on fields that produce the starchy staples for the family, and then allocates individual plots among other household members. And individual plots are exclusively managed by women in a third of the households that are included in the data set. And this, by the way, is a nationally representative data set in Burkina Faso. 42% of households cultivate cowpea, and in stark contrast to what we found in Mali, 85% of female plot managers report cowpea as a primary crop, compared to just 5% for male plot managers. And in this case, in Burkina Faso, there is a complex subsidy program that involves not only fertilizer, but seed of a number of crops. So she's looking at the net effects of that program on participating households. And the first thing that she finds has to do with resource control, and that is that the effect of the overall program is fewer individual plots allocated to either male or female household members. And then, sort of as we keep finding in the data sets, regardless of models and regardless of data sets, less land allocated to individual plots managed by women only, less land allocated to cowpea as a primary or a secondary crop, and less land intercropped with cowpea at the household level. The last paper that we're working on in this project is a descriptive paper, and it's being led by Andrea Allen. We're calling it Fact or Folklore, is cowpea a women's crop or women's enterprise in Mali? And Andrea did a very thorough review of the literature, the gray literature and peer-reviewed literature. And we looked at our large-scale data sets again, seeing that Malian women are less likely to manage cowpea plots than men. They manage smaller cowpea plots, and they sell less, although they earn more from their sales. But we can combine this with the data that were collected under AO12 in a survey that was led by Mamadou Sissoko. And in that survey data, he finds that almost all vendors of processed cowpea products and fresh leaves in local markets are women. That women also retail cowpea grain, but in small quantities, and that men are fewer among cowpea vendors, generally collecting the grain and selling fiber. We received some cross-cutting funds to implement 2 nutrition workshops. These were led by Amidou Assema in Mali and in Burkina Faso. It was live in Mali and virtual in Burkina Faso. And you see, there were a few students, just, about a dozen in either one of them. This was a hands-on workshop in which Amidou prepared data sets for them, PowerPoint presentations on how to construct and interpret indicators of diet quality, and then spent the afternoons helping them learn how to construct these using Stata. The groups then, the students then broke into small groups to formulate and test hypotheses and report results. Right now, we are conducting a Kaleidoscope model case study, and this is being led by Mamadou Sissoko and Amidou Asima, and supported by Buruma Kone and Yanisia Kone in Mali. Most of you are probably aware of the Kaleidoscope policy model that was developed by researchers at IFPRI and Steve Hadglade, who was at Michigan State University. This is a very interesting qualitative research method that enables you to identify key policy junctures and points of change and circle of influence of stakeholders that have affected these changes. You conduct a series of semi-structured interviews with the stakeholders, and there are some specific tools you use in the analysis. As you can tell from my description, I'm not an expert in this, but the team is doing a great job as far as I can tell. Thank you.
My name is Maimuna Hamana Tama. I am a PhD student at Université Norbert Zongo in Burkina Faso. My research is about pathways toward improving the nutritional status of rural people in Burkina Faso, either farm or market. The general fact in developing countries, including Burkina Faso, is that households both buy and produce their food in rural areas. Burkina Faso is a small, landlocked, open economy with high rates of food insecurity. So whether farm production or market development most affects household food security still puzzles economists, because study findings are varied and separating causal effects of each component is difficult. We have two research questions. First, we ask whether crop species diversity on farms or market participation contributes more to diet quality of farm families in Burkina Faso. Then the second question is about the role of seasonality in changing the effects. In terms of literature, we have two main points. Dietary diversity is a broad measure of nutrition adequacy. We noticed that in our readings. Second thing is that reviews and meta-analysis conclude that the effect of crop diversity on diet diversity is positive but small. So, our research goes further by empirically investigating the relative importance of farm and market in improving nutritional status, and the originality of this paper is twofold. First, the construction of three indicators to express farm diversity, each based on a specific motivation, and then the test of seasonality. We use cross-sectional data from the World Bank collected in 2014 and which covered the whole country. Also, we use weather data downloaded from NASA site. As I said before, we constructed three different indicators to explain on farm diversity. And regarding the market participation variable, we take the natural log of value of crop sales. To express diet diversity, we calculate the household dietary diversity score by season. Let's say that here we have 4 quarters for the year. In terms of explanatory variables, let's say that they are chosen based on the literature. Descriptive statistics points out First, the difference, although small, of the household diversity score during the year. Also, it shows the different distributions of the three indicators, although both express on-farm diversity, they are different by definition, and each of them, as I said before, is constructed based on specific motivation. So, for example, the Menhenic expresses the richness, while Simpson expresses richness and regularity, and cereal area share is the percentage of land area allocated to cereals. Also, descriptive statistics show here that there is a high variability of the distribution of the variable for market participation. So, we use the conditional mixed process model developed by Rudman in 2011. This approach addresses endogeneity in a simultaneous equation framework. The model is regressed with full information maximum likelihood. And we use a set of explanatory variables related to household, market, plots, and weather characteristics. In terms of results, let's say first that market participation is always positive and smaller, regardless of the specification. Second, we notice that the effects of Menhenic and Simpson indexes are both positive, while the effect of cereal area share is negative. Simpson has actually greater effect among the three, showing that the count of crops is not uniquely associated to nutrition, but the size allocated for each crop plays an essential role. Third thing is that the negative relation between the cereal area share and the diet diversity can be explained as a confirmation that household consume cereals and the agriculture is extensive in Burkina Faso. So we sum up our findings into 2 points. First, on-farm diversity has a greater impact on diet diversity than market participation. And this is contrary to findings in much of the literature, but it's consistent with findings for Mali. Second thing is about seasonality, which we notice eliminates one of the two effects at certain periods during the year. In terms of conclusion, both farm and market are associated to diet diversity, but the farm effects are greater. The results show clearly that farming households continue to rely heavily on their production for food. Our findings are in favor of interventions tending to cautiously improve on farm diversity, but our findings are not encouraging expanding area allocated to cereals. So the interventions are, for instance, seed supply, because market-based incentives for diverse crops at the regional scale could strengthen both farm and market pathways. Moreover, findings suggest to take seasonality into account when implementing the policies. We reached the end of our presentation. Thank you for your attention.